Bank manager tore up a black waitress's $10 million check. Then her boss said, "Sir." The sound of paper tearing cut through the quiet bank lobby like a knife slicing through silk. Rebecca stood there, her hands still extended where the check had been just seconds before, watching the pieces of her future scatter across the polished marble floor. $10 million. Torn in half. Then in quarters. Then crumpled and thrown at her chest like garbage. "Get out," the manager hissed, her perfectly painted lips curling with disgust. "Get out before I have you arrested for fraud." Rebecca didn't move. She couldn't. Her worn shoes, the ones with the hole in the left sole that she covered with cardboard every morning, felt glued to the floor. Around her, dozens of people watched. Some had their phones out, recording. Others whispered behind manicured hands. But not one person spoke up. Not one person said, "Wait, maybe you should check if that's real first." Then the front doors opened. A man walked in, silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of presence that made everyone stand a little straighter. The manager's face lit up instantly, her anger transforming into a bright, professional smile. "Mr. Thornton." What a pleasant surprise. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Rebecca. His face had gone white as fresh snow. He walked past the manager like she was invisible. Past the security guard. Past all the watching customers. He stopped directly in front of Rebecca, and when he spoke, his voice trembled. "Sir." The word hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you're new here, welcome to stories that will stay with you long after they end. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. That morning started like every other morning for Rebecca Stone. The alarm went off at 4:47 a.m. Not 4:45, not 4:50, but 4:47, because those extra 2 minutes of sleep felt like a gift she gave herself every day. She lived in a tiny apartment in the Bronx, the kind where you could touch both walls of the bedroom if you stretched out your arms. The paint was peeling near the ceiling, and the radiator clanked like an angry ghost, but it was hers. Well, rented, but still hers. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror, the light flickering the way it always did, and pulled her hair back into a tight bun. Her reflection stared back at her. 43 years old, dark skin that her grandmother used to say was the color of midnight honey, and eyes that had seen more than most people would believe. The uniform hanging on the back of the door was faded from too many washes. Esther's Diner, stitched across the pocket in blue thread that was coming loose at the edges. She put it on the same way she had every morning for the past 4 years. Slowly, carefully, like putting on armor. Because that's what it was really. Armor. The subway ride to Manhattan took 53 minutes. Rebecca counted every one of them. She sat in the corner seat, her small purse clutched in her lap, and watched the city wake up through the scratched windows. Construction workers getting on at 125th Street. Nurses in scrubs at 86th. Businessmen in suits at 59th, already on their phones, already annoyed about something. Nobody looked at her. That was one thing about wearing a uniform. You became invisible. Just part of the background. Like furniture. She arrived at Esther's Diner at 6:15 a.m. Esther was already there, of course. Esther was always there. A large woman with arms that could hug you or flip a grown man out of the diner with equal efficiency, depending on what you deserved. She'd owned this place for 32 years, and she ran it like a general ran an army. With love, but don't you dare step out of line. "Morning, Becca," Esther called from behind the counter, already pouring coffee for the early crowd. "Morning, Miss Esther. You look tired, baby. You sleeping okay?" Rebecca smiled, tying her apron around her waist. "Sleeping fine. Just dreaming a lot lately." "Good dreams or bad dreams?" "Don't know yet." Esther gave her that look, the one that said she saw more than Rebecca wanted her to see. But she didn't push. That was another thing about Esther. She knew when to let things be. The morning rush hit at 7:30 like it always did. Pancakes, eggs, bacon, coffee, more coffee. Rebecca moved between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing plates, remembering orders, smiling at customers who rarely smiled back. There was the lawyer who always sat in booth 3 and never tipped more than $1. The teacher who came in every Wednesday and left exactly 15%, counted to the penny. The construction crew who were loud and messy, but always left 20s on the table. At 11:47 a.m., Rebecca's phone buzzed in her pocket. She was carrying a stack of dirty plates to the kitchen, and she almost dropped them. Her phone never rang during work. Never. She set the plates down and checked the screen. Unknown number. Her finger hovered over the decline button, but something made her answer. Hello. Is this Rebecca Stone? A man's voice. Professional. Cold. Yes. Who's this? My name is Michael Chin. I'm calling from Bradford & Associates law firm. We've been trying to reach you regarding the estate of Samuel Stone. Rebecca's hand tightened on the phone. Samuel. She hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in 4 years. Not since the funeral. Not since she'd stood in the rain watching them lower a casket into the ground while 200 people who claimed to love him stood under black umbrellas, already checking their watches. What about his estate? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Mrs. Stone, I apologize for the delay in reaching you. There have been some complications with the will, but there's a matter that requires your immediate attention. A property sale that was finalized yesterday. The proceeds check is ready for pickup. Proceeds? What property? The warehouse complex in Red Hook. It's been sold to a development company. Mrs. Stone, the check is made out to you for $10 million. The kitchen spun. Rebecca reached out and grabbed the counter to steady herself. $10 million. Yes, ma'am. The will specified that all proceeds from the Red Hook property were to go directly to you. Mr. Stone was very clear about that. We can messenger the check to you, or if you prefer, you can pick it up at our office today. Rebecca looked down at her uniform, at the grease stain on her apron from this morning, at her worn shoes. I'll pick it up, she heard herself say. Excellent. We're at 450 Park Avenue, 12th floor. I'll have the check ready for you. And Mrs. Stone? I'm sorry for your loss. I know it's been some years, but Samuel spoke very highly of you. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of. The line went dead. Rebecca stood in that kitchen, surrounded by the smell of frying bacon and burnt toast, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not sadness. Not exactly. Something more complicated than that. For years ago, her husband Samuel had died of a heart attack at his office desk. 49 years old. Gone in an instant. They'd been married for 23 years, and she'd thought she knew everything about him. They'd built a life together, a good life, she'd thought. A beautiful home in Westchester. 2 cars. Vacations. Everything a person was supposed to want. But after he died, things had come out. Things she hadn't known. The gambling. The debts. The second mortgages. The business deals that weren't quite legal. The FBI investigation that was quietly dropped after his death because there was no one left to prosecute. The beautiful house? Seized by the bank. The cars? Repossessed. The vacations? Paid for with money that belonged to other people. She'd been left with nothing except a tiny life insurance policy that barely covered the funeral and a last name that had become a joke in certain circles. Samuel Stone? Oh yeah, the guy who stole from his own partners. She'd moved to the Bronx. Got a job at the diner. Started over from less than zero. And now, for years later, a lawyer was telling her that Samuel had left her $10 million? Becca? Esther's voice cut through her thoughts. You okay, baby? You look like you saw a ghost. Rebecca turned to her. Sweet Esther, who'd given her this job when nobody else would hire her. Who'd never once asked about her past or why a woman with her education was working as a waitress. Who'd slipped extra money into her paycheck sometimes and pretended it was a holiday bonus in March. Miss Esther, Rebecca said slowly, I need to take the rest of the day off. Something wrong? I don't know yet, but I need to go into the city. There's something I need to take care of. Esther studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Go on then. Whatever it is, you handle it. I'll cover your tables. Rebecca untied her apron with shaking hands. She went to the tiny bathroom in the back and looked at herself in the spotted mirror. Same face. Same uniform. But something was different now. Something had shifted. She thought about calling someone. But who? Her sister lived in Atlanta, and they hadn't spoken in 2 years. Her son, Joshua, was in college in California, and she didn't want to worry him with something she didn't understand yet. Her daughter, Miriam, was doing her medical residency in Chicago and barely had time to breathe, let alone deal with family drama. No, this was something she needed to face alone. The subway ride back into Manhattan felt different this time. Rebecca sat clutching her purse, feeling the weight of what she'd just learned pressing down on her like a physical thing. $10 million. From a man who'd left her with nothing but shame. Bradford & Associates law firm occupied the entire 12th floor of a gleaming tower on Park Avenue. Rebecca walked through the lobby, her shoes squeaking slightly on the pristine floor, and felt every eye in the place track her movement. A security guard near the elevator straightened up, watching her approach with the kind of attention that made her skin prickle. "Can I help you?" His tone suggested he doubted it very much. "I have an appointment. Michael Chin, 12th floor." He looked her up and down, taking in her diner uniform. "Name? Rebecca Stone." He picked up a phone, spoke quietly into it, then nodded toward the elevators. "Go on up." The law office was all glass and steel and expensive silence. The receptionist, a young white woman with perfect teeth and a suit that probably cost more than Rebecca made in a month, smiled professionally. "Mrs. Stone, Mr. Chin is expecting you. Right this way." Michael Chin was exactly what his voice had suggested. Mid-40s, Asian American, expensive suit, briefcase on his desk that probably cost more than Rebecca's first car. But his handshake was warm, and when he looked at her, he actually looked at her. Not through her. Not past her. At her. "Mrs. Stone. Thank you for coming in." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine." Rebecca sat down, her hands folded in her lap. "Mr. Chin, I don't understand. Samuel died 4 years ago. Why am I only hearing about this now?" Chin opened a folder on his desk. "The Red Hook property was part of a complex trust arrangement. Your husband set it up years before his death, 12 years ago to be exact. The trust terms specified that the property could not be sold until at least 10 years had passed, and that any proceeds from the sale would go entirely to you, bypassing his estate completely." "Why would he do that?" Chin looked uncomfortable for the first time. "Mrs. Stone, I didn't know your husband personally, but based on the structure of this trust, I believe he was trying to protect something, to make sure that no matter what happened to him or his business dealings, you would have something that couldn't be touched." Rebecca stared at him. He knew. He knew it would all fall apart. "I can't speak to that. But yes, it appears he took steps to ensure you were provided for." Chin pulled out an envelope from his desk drawer. "This is the check. It's made out to you for the full sale amount minus legal fees and taxes. $10,200,000. Rebecca took the envelope with trembling hands. She opened it slowly, afraid that if she moved too fast, it would disappear like smoke. But there it was. A check. Her name printed across the pay to the order of line. $10,200,000. She stared at it for so long that Chin cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Stone, is everything all right?" Rebecca looked up at him. "Mr. Chin, for years ago, I lost everything. The house, the cars, the savings. Everything. People I thought were friends stopped returning my calls. My own family." She stopped, swallowing hard. "My own family acted like I had done something wrong. Like I was the one who'd stolen money. I'm sorry you went through that. I went to banks to try to open new accounts, and they treated me like I was a criminal. Like the name Stone was something dirty. I had to start over from nothing. Less than nothing." She looked down at the check again. All those zeros. Enough money to change everything. To get her house back, or buy a new one. To stop working at the diner. To never have to worry about the hole in her shoe or whether she could afford her electric bill. "What are you going to do?" Chin asked quietly. Rebecca folded the check carefully and put it back in the envelope. She slipped it into her purse and stood up. "I'm going to deposit it. Would you like me to recommend a bank? I can make some calls, ensure you're treated." "No." Rebecca's voice was firm. "No special treatment. No calls ahead. I'm going to walk into a bank like anyone else and deposit this check like anyone else." Chin looked puzzled. "Mrs. Stone, forgive me, but why? With that amount of money, you could." "I could what? Make it easier?" "Mr. Chin, for 4 years, I've been invisible. I've served coffee to people who wouldn't spit on me if I was on fire. I've smiled at customers who snapped their fingers at me like I was a dog. I've been treated like nothing because I looked like nothing." She picked up her purse and headed for the door. Then she stopped and turned back. "I want to see what happens when I walk into a bank in this uniform with this check. I want to see how I'm treated when I don't look like I belong. Because if they treat me the way I think they will, well, then we'll all learn something important, won't we?" Chin stood up, concerned now. "Mrs. Stone, I don't think." But Rebecca was already walking out. The Madison Trust Bank sat on the corner of Madison Avenue and 48th Street, all marble columns and brass fixtures. The kind of bank that screamed old money from every polished surface. Rebecca had walked past it 100 times in her 4 years working at the diner. had never once thought about going inside. Now she pushed through the heavy doors and stepped into the lobby. It was like entering a cathedral. Marble floors reflected the light from crystal chandeliers. The ceiling soared 30 feet above her head. Everything was designed to make people feel either very important or very small, depending on who they were. Rebecca knew which category she fell into, at least in appearance. The lunch hour crowd filled the space with quiet murmurs. Men in suits checking their portfolios on tablets. Women with designer purses making deposits that most people would never see in a lifetime. And there, in her faded diner uniform with grease still on her apron, was Rebecca Stone. She felt every eye in the place land on her. Felt the weight of their judgment like a physical thing pressing against her skin. But she'd promised herself she would do this. So she walked to the counter, her worn shoes squeaking slightly on the perfect marble, and waited for the next available teller. The young man behind the counter, his nameplate read Daniel, looked up with a practiced smile that faltered when he saw her uniform. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice carrying that careful tone people used when they weren't sure if they were talking to a customer or someone who'd wandered in off the street. "How can I help you?" Rebecca reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady as stone. "I'd like to deposit this into my account." She placed the check on the marble counter. Daniel looked down at it, and his whole body went rigid. The number stared up at him. $10,200,000. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. I need to get my manager." "Of course," Rebecca said calmly. She'd expected this. What she hadn't expected was how long the wait would be. Daniel disappeared into a back office, and Rebecca stood there at the counter for 3 minutes. Then 5. Then 7. Around her, other customers were being helped. Transactions were being completed. But Rebecca just stood there, waiting. When the manager finally appeared, Rebecca understood the delay. The woman had needed time to prepare herself. To put on her armor, just like Rebecca had put on hers that morning. The manager was named Victoria Brennan, according to her gold nameplate. She was maybe 40, white blonde, dressed in a suit that probably cost 3 months of Rebecca's salary at the diner. Everything about her screamed success. The perfect makeup, the designer shoes, the way she carried herself like she owned not just this bank, but the entire block it sat on. Victoria's eyes swept over Rebecca, taking in every detail. The uniform, the worn shoes, the grease stain, the calloused hands from years of carrying plates and wiping down tables. And Rebecca saw something flicker across Victoria's face. Not just judgment, something deeper. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Ma'am," Victoria said, and the word dripped with condescension. "May I ask where you obtained this check?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade. And that's when Rebecca knew, with absolute certainty, exactly how this was going to go. Rebecca looked directly into Victoria Brennan's eyes and saw everything she needed to see. It was like looking through a window into the woman's soul, and what she found there wasn't pretty. Judgment, suspicion, and something worse, certainty. Victoria had already decided who Rebecca was and what she deserved. "It's payment from a property sale," Rebecca said, her voice steady. "A real estate transaction." Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched so high it almost disappeared into her hairline. "A real estate transaction." She said it the way you might say a fairy tale, or a lie. "I see. And what exactly do you do for a living, ma'am?" The question was a trap, and they both knew it. "I'm a waitress." The words fell between them like stones dropping into still water. Ripples spread outward through the lobby. Rebecca could feel it, the shift in atmosphere, the way conversations around them grew quieter, the way people began to turn and look. A man in a 3-piece suit lowered his newspaper. A woman with a handbag that probably cost more than Rebecca's monthly rent whispered something to her companion. Another woman actually took out her phone, angling it toward the counter. Victoria's lips curved into a smile that had nothing to do with kindness. It was the smile of a hunter who'd just spotted prey. "A waitress," Victoria repeated, savoring the word. "With a check for $10 million. She picked up the check between 2 fingers, holding it delicately, as if it might be contaminated. "That's quite a tip." Someone in the lobby actually laughed. A short, sharp sound that cut through the air. Rebecca felt heat crawl up her neck, but she kept her voice level. "The check is legitimate. You can verify it by calling the issuing bank. The number is printed right there." "Oh, I'm sure it looks very legitimate," Victoria said. Her voice was growing louder now, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. That's how these scams work, isn't it? They look real. They feel real. Until you try to cash them and discover they're worth less than the paper they're printed on. It's not a scam. Then you won't mind if I run some additional verification? Victoria's smile widened. I'm going to need 2 forms of identification. And I'll need you to explain exactly how a waitress came into possession of a check for this amount. Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't about verification. This was about humiliation. About putting her in her place. About making sure everyone in this marble palace knew that she didn't belong here. But she'd come too far to back down now. She pulled out her driver's license and passport from her purse and placed them on the counter. Here. Victoria examined them the way a jeweler might examine a suspicious diamond. Holding them up to the light, comparing the photos to Rebecca's face, running her finger over the edges as if checking for signs of forgery. The whole performance took nearly 3 minutes, and every second of it was designed to make Rebecca feel like a criminal. Around them, the lobby had gone almost completely quiet. This wasn't just a banking transaction anymore. It was a show, entertainment, and Rebecca was the main attraction. These appear to be in order, Victoria finally said, though she sounded almost disappointed. But that doesn't explain the check. I'm going to need to verify the source of these funds. We take fraud very seriously at Madison Trust. Then call the bank, Rebecca said. The number is right there on the check. Bradford & Associates law firm handled the transaction. You can call them too. Michael Chun. I just came from his office. But Victoria didn't reach for the phone. Instead, she picked up the receiver and dialed an internal extension. Security, she said, her voice sharp and official. I need assistance at the main counter. We have a suspicious transaction in progress. The words landed like a slap. Rebecca's hands tightened on her purse. You haven't even verified anything yet. Ma'am, I don't need to verify what I can see with my own eyes. Victoria's voice had taken on an edge now, hard and cutting. You walk in here dressed like that. She gestured at Rebecca's uniform with barely disguised disgust. With a check for $10 million, and you expect me to believe it's legitimate? Do you think I'm stupid? I think you're not doing your job. Victoria's eyes flashed. My job is to protect this institution from people like you. People like me? Rebecca's voice remained quiet, but there was steel underneath now. What kind of people would that be? Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a security guard appeared at her side. He was a large man, 6'3" at least, with shoulders like a linebacker and arms that strained against his uniform sleeves. His hand rested on his belt, near the radio clip there, and he looked at Rebecca the way you might look at a threat that needed to be neutralized. Is there a problem here? His voice was deep, authoritative. This woman is attempting to deposit what I believe to be a fraudulent check, Victoria said. I've asked her to step aside while we investigate, but she's refusing to cooperate. I'm not refusing to cooperate, Rebecca said calmly. I'm asking you to do your job and verify the check before making accusations. The security guard took a step closer to her. Close enough that Rebecca could smell his cologne, sharp and overwhelming. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the counter. I have the right to complete my transaction. You have the right to be detained for attempted fraud if that check turns out to be fake, Victoria said. Her voice was rising now, filling the lobby. Have you even thought about what happens when we call the police? When they run your name and see that your husband was under FBI investigation before he died? When they connect you to Samuel Stone, the man who stole from his own business partners? The lobby went completely silent. Rebecca felt the world tilt sideways. Victoria had done her homework. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe she'd recognized the name Stone and remembered the scandal from 4 years ago. Either way, she'd just dropped that information into the lobby like a grenade, and everyone was waiting to see how Rebecca would react. Daniel, the young teller, had gone pale behind the counter. His eyes darted between Victoria and Rebecca like he was watching a car accident happen in slow motion. The woman with the expensive handbag had her phone up now, definitely recording. Others were doing the same. In the age of social media, this was content. Drama. Something to post and share and comment on. Rebecca looked at Victoria. Really looked at her. And she saw something that made her heart ache. Not anger exactly, but a kind of desperate certainty. Victoria believed she was right. She believed she was protecting the bank, protecting society, from someone who didn't belong. And that belief made her dangerous in a way that simple cruelty never could. You're not going to verify the check, are you? Rebecca said quietly. I don't need to verify what I already know. And what do you know? Victoria leaned forward across the counter, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that somehow still carried through the silent lobby. I know that women like you don't walk into banks like this with checks like that. I know that this whole thing, she gestured at the check, at Rebecca, at everything, is wrong. You can feel it. And if you had any sense, you'd take this fake check and walk out of here before I call the police and make this a whole lot worse for you. Rebecca felt something break inside her chest. Not her spirit. Not her resolve. Something else. Some last, fragile hope that people could look past surfaces and see truth. She'd known this might happen. She'd told Michael Chin she wanted to see how she'd be treated. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally were two very different things. So that's it, Rebecca said. You look at me and you just know. I've been in banking for 15 years, Victoria said, straightening up. I know how to read people. I know who belongs in this bank and who doesn't. And you. Her eyes swept over Rebecca one more time, taking in every detail of her worn uniform, her scuffed shoes, her work-roughened hands. You don't belong here. The security guard's hand moved to his radio. Ma'am, last chance. Step away from the counter, or we will remove you. Rebecca looked down at the check, still lying on the marble counter under Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers. $10 million. Her future. Her security. Her children's futures. The proof that Samuel, despite everything else, had tried to protect her. And Victoria was going to destroy it because Rebecca didn't look right. No, Rebecca said quietly. Victoria blinked. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not leaving. I'm not stepping away. I'm going to stand right here until you do your job and verify this check. Or until you do what you're really planning to do. Something flickered across Victoria's face. Uncertainty, maybe. Or surprise that Rebecca wasn't backing down. The security guard moved closer. Ma'am, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm not making anything hard, Rebecca said. I'm a customer trying to complete a legitimate transaction. If that's hard, then something is very wrong with this bank. Victoria's face flushed red. You want to know what's wrong? What's wrong is people like you trying to steal from hardworking people. What's wrong is scam artists walking in here thinking they can fool us with fake checks and sob stories. I haven't told you any story. You don't need to. Your life tells the story. Failed marriage to a criminal. Dead husband who left you with nothing. Working as a waitress because you can't do anything else. And now you show up with a check for $10 million and expect us to believe it's real. Victoria's voice was shaking now with self-righteous anger. Do you think we're idiots? Rebecca felt the weight of every eye in the lobby pressing down on her. She saw the phones recording, capturing every moment of her humiliation. She saw Daniel behind the counter, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. She saw the other customers, some looking uncomfortable, others looking satisfied, like they were watching justice being served. And she made a choice. My husband wasn't a criminal, she said, her voice carrying through the silent lobby. He made mistakes. Bad ones. But he wasn't the monster you're making him out to be. And I'm not a scam artist. I'm a woman who has worked every single day for 4 years to rebuild a life that fell apart. I've served coffee to people who wouldn't learn my name. I've smiled at customers who treated me like I was invisible. I've done honest work and earned honest money. Then where did the check come from? Victoria demanded. I told you. A property sale. My husband set up a trust 12 years ago. It just paid out. Convenient. It's the truth. Victoria laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. The truth is that you're a waitress trying to cash a fake check for $10 million. The truth is that you're wasting everyone's time with this ridiculous charade. The truth. She picked up the check. And before Rebecca could move, before anyone could stop her, Victoria tore it in half. The sound echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. Rebecca watched the two pieces separate, the numbers splitting apart, her name divided into syllables that didn't mean anything anymore. But Victoria wasn't finished. She tore the halves into quarters. Then she crumpled the pieces in her fist and threw them at Rebecca's chest. The fragments of paper hit her uniform and scattered across the marble floor, coming to rest at her worn shoes like confetti at the world's saddest party. Get out, Victoria said, her voice trembling with anger and satisfaction. Get out of my bank before I have you arrested. The security guard moved forward, his hand finally leaving his belt. Time to go, ma'am. But Rebecca didn't move. She stood there, staring at the torn pieces of her future scattered on the floor. She felt something building inside her, not rage, not despair, but something colder and more powerful than either. Around her, the lobby remained frozen. Phones still recording. Customers still watching. Nobody moving. Nobody speaking. Not one single person in that entire marble palace said, "Wait, maybe you should have checked first." Not one person said, "This doesn't seem right." Not one person stood up for her. She bent down slowly and picked up 2 of the torn pieces. She held them in her hands, looking at the fragments of numbers that had once meant salvation. Then she straightened and looked directly at Victoria. "I'm not leaving," she said. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Then I'm calling the police." "Call them." "You think I won't?" "I think you should," Rebecca said, her voice steady as stone. "And while you're at it, I want you to remember something. Remember this moment. Remember how certain you were. Remember how you looked at a human being and decided what she was worth based on her clothes and her skin and the assumptions you made in 10 seconds. I don't need to remember anything except that you tried to commit fraud in my bank." "Your bank." Rebecca's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but somehow it carried through every corner of that massive lobby. "You think this is your bank?" Victoria opened her mouth to respond. And that's when the front doors opened. The man who walked in moved like he owned the world. Silver hair perfectly styled. Suit that probably cost more than most cars. Shoes that clicked on the marble with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. Richard Thornton, chairman of Madison Trust Bank. He'd come for an unannounced inspection, the way he did sometimes when he wanted to keep his managers on their toes. He liked to see how his banks operated when they didn't know he was watching. Victoria's face transformed instantly. The anger vanished, replaced by a bright, professional smile that looked like it had been painted on. "Mr. Thornton, what a wonderful surprise. The branch is running beautifully, as you can see. We actually just prevented what appeared to be a significant fraud attempt." But Richard Thornton wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the woman in the waitress uniform. The one with torn pieces of paper clutched in her hands. The one with customers all around her, phones raised, capturing everything. His face went white. He walked past Victoria like she didn't exist. Past the security guard. Past Daniel. Past all the watching customers. He stopped directly in front of Rebecca Stone. And he said one word. "Sir, subscribe to this channel to support our growth." The word hung in the air like lightning that hadn't quite struck yet. "Sir." Victoria's smile froze on her face. Her perfectly painted lips stayed curved upward, but everything behind them, every calculation, every assumption, every ounce of confidence, crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a wave. "Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice suddenly small and uncertain. I don't understand." But Richard Thornton didn't even glance at her. His eyes remained fixed on Rebecca, and in them was something that made Victoria's stomach drop to her feet. Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. "Mrs. Stone," he said, and his voice trembled slightly. "I had no idea you would be visiting us today." The lobby had gone so quiet that Rebecca could hear her own heartbeat. Thump, 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 like drums counting down to something inevitable. She looked at this man, this powerful, wealthy man, and saw him struggling to breathe properly. Saw his hands trembling at his sides. Saw the sheen of sweat beginning to form on his upper lip despite the perfectly controlled temperature of the bank. "Mrs. Stone," Victoria's voice cracked on the second word. "But she said she was a waitress. She came in here with a legitimate check," Richard finished, his voice tight. "Didn't she?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. I didn't verify it yet. It seems suspicious." "You didn't verify it." Richard's words came out slowly, each one deliberate and heavy. "You didn't verify it." He finally turned to look at Victoria, and what she saw in his face made her take an actual step backward. The security guard, sensing the shift in power, had moved away from Rebecca and now stood frozen, unsure what to do with his hands. "Mr. Thornton," Victoria tried again, her voice climbing higher. "The check was for $10 million. She walked in wearing a diner uniform. I made a judgment call based on what?" Richard's voice cracked like a whip through the lobby. "Based on her clothes? Her skin? The fact that she didn't look like she belonged in your bank. I was trying to protect the institution. By tearing up a check from our largest shareholder?" Richard's face had gone from white to red. "By humiliating the woman who owns 35% of this bank in front of dozens of witnesses with their phones out." The number dropped into the lobby like a bomb. 35%. Victoria's legs actually wobbled. She reached out to grip the counter to steady herself. That's not possible. Mrs. Rebecca Stone, Richard said, each word now carved from ice, is the widow of Samuel Stone. Samuel Stone, who founded Stone Holdings. Stone Holdings, which merged with Madison Trust 15 years ago. The merger that saved this bank from bankruptcy and made it what it is today. He turned back to Rebecca, and his voice dropped to something that sounded almost like begging. Mrs. Stone, please. If I had known you were coming, you would have what? Rebecca's voice was calm. Too calm. Like the eye of a hurricane. Rolled out the red carpet? Made sure your staff knew to treat me differently than they treat everyone else. I would have ensured you received the service you deserve. And what service does a waitress deserve, Mr. Thornton? The question hung unanswered in the air. Rebecca looked around the lobby, at the customers who'd been so eager to watch her humiliation, now unable to meet her eyes. At Daniel, still frozen behind the counter, his young face pale as milk. At the security guard, who had suddenly discovered something very interesting about his shoes. At Victoria, whose perfect makeup couldn't hide the fact that her entire world was collapsing. And then she looked down at the torn pieces of the check in her hands. You know what the saddest part is? Rebecca said quietly. It's not that she assumed I was a criminal. That's happened before. It'll happen again. What breaks my heart is how certain she was. She didn't even consider for 1 second that she might be wrong. Mrs. Stone, Richard said, and now there was definite pleading in his voice. Please, let's go to my office. We can discuss this privately. I can assure you. No. The word was soft but absolute. No. Richard blinked like someone had just spoken to him in a language he didn't understand. I don't want to discuss this privately, Rebecca said. I've spent 4 years being private, Mr. Thornton. For years being invisible. For years watching how the world treats people who look like me when they don't know who I am. And today I got my answer. She took a step toward Victoria, who flinched like Rebecca might hit her. But Rebecca's voice remained gentle. Almost sad. If I weren't Rebecca Stone, she said. If I were exactly who you thought I was, just a waitress named Rebecca with a legitimate check, what would have happened to me? Victoria's lips trembled. I was following protocol. What protocol tells you to destroy someone's property without verifying it first? I made a judgment based on the circumstances. Based on what? Rebecca's voice sharpened for the first time. Based on my uniform? My shoes? The calluses on my hands from years of honest work? Or was it something else? Something you don't want to say out loud in front of all these cameras. Victoria's face crumpled. Tears began to stream down her cheeks, leaving black tracks of mascara. Please, she whispered. I have children. I have a family. I made a mistake, but I don't deserve to lose everything. My husband died 4 years ago, Rebecca said quietly. Heart attack at his desk. 49 years old. We'd been married 23 years, and I thought I knew everything about him. Thought we'd built a good life together. She looked around the lobby, making eye contact with the people still recording, still watching. After he died, I found out about the gambling. The debts. The business deals that weren't quite legal. The FBI investigation. And suddenly, everyone who'd smiled at me at parties, everyone who'd called me a friend, disappeared. The house was seized. The cars were taken. Everything went away except my last name, and that became a curse. Her voice didn't waver. Didn't break. But everyone listening could hear the weight of pain underneath each word. I moved to a tiny apartment in the Bronx. Got a job at Esther's Diner, because Esther was the only person who'd hire me. And for 4 years, I served coffee and eggs and pancakes to people who never learned my name. Who snapped their fingers at me like I was a dog. Who left dollar tips on $50 bills and thought they were being generous. Daniel made a small sound behind the counter. Something between a gasp and a sob. I learned what it meant to be invisible, Rebecca continued. To have people look right through you because you're wearing a uniform and serving them food. To know that if you disappeared tomorrow, they wouldn't even notice. She turned back to Victoria. So when you ask what would have happened if I was just a waitress, I can tell you exactly what would have happened. You would have torn up my check. Called security. Maybe called the police. You would have humiliated me in front of all these people, and then I would have left with nothing. No check. No apology. Nothing but the knowledge that the world had just confirmed what it thinks of people like me. Victoria was openly weeping now, her professional mask completely shattered. I'm sorry, she choked out. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean. You did mean it, Rebecca said, not unkindly. That's the problem. You meant every bit of it. You looked at me and you knew, you were absolutely certain, that I didn't belong here. And that certainty let you do something cruel without even questioning yourself. Richard Thornton stepped forward, positioning himself between the two women. His face had gone through several transformations in the last few minutes: shock, fear, anger, calculation. Now it settled into something that looked like resignation. He was a practical man. He'd built his career on knowing when to cut losses and when to fight. And standing there, looking at Rebecca Stone with torn pieces of a $10 million check in her hands and dozens of phones recording everything, he knew this was not a fight he could win. "Mrs. Stone," he said carefully, "what do you want?" It was the right question. Maybe the only question that mattered now. Rebecca looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Victoria, at Daniel, at the security guard, at all the customers still frozen in their spots, witnessing something they would talk about for years. "I want you to understand something," she said. "I didn't come here to trap anyone. I didn't plan this. I could have gone to any bank in the city. I could have called ahead and made sure I was treated well. But I wanted to see something. I needed to know something." "What did you need to know?" Richard asked quietly. Whether anything had changed. Rebecca's voice grew softer. "My husband, before he died, he asked me a question. He said, 'Do you know how the world will treat you without the money? Without the name? Without all the things that make people respect you?' And I told him it wouldn't matter. I told him people were fundamentally good. That they would see me for who I really was." She laughed, and it was the saddest sound anyone in that lobby had ever heard. "I was wrong. So wrong. And I've spent 4 years discovering just how wrong I was. Store clerks following me through aisles because they thought I might steal something. Taxi drivers passing me by on the street. Restaurant hosts seating me by the kitchen while white customers in jeans got window tables. Security guards watching me like I was dangerous just for existing in certain spaces." Richard's face had gone pale again. "Mrs. Stone, I kept a list," Rebecca continued. "Every small cruelty. Every casual dismissal. Every moment when someone decided what I was worth based on how I looked. And you know what I realized? It wasn't a few bad apples. It was a system. A pattern. A way of seeing the world that told people like Victoria," she gestured at the weeping manager, "that they were right to treat people like me as suspicious. As less than. As not belonging." She bent down and began gathering the torn pieces of the check from the floor. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Every person in that lobby watched her pick up each fragment, and the silence was so complete that they could hear the whisper of paper against her palms. When she had collected all the pieces, she stood up and looked at Richard Thornton. "I don't want compensation," she said. "I don't want Victoria fired in the dark where nobody sees. I don't want a private settlement that makes this go away quietly." "Then what do you want?" Richard asked, though he looked like he was afraid of the answer. "I want an investigation. A real one. Not just of Victoria, not just of this branch, but of this entire bank. I want to know how many other people have been treated the way I was treated today. I want to see the patterns, the policies, the unwritten rules that told Victoria she could look at me and just know that I didn't belong." Richard's face cycled through emotions again: alarm, calculation, fear. "Mrs. Stone, you understand what that would mean. Media attention, legal exposure, stock price fluctuations. The board will do what I tell them to do." Rebecca's voice carried a quiet authority that reminded everyone in that lobby exactly who she was. "I own 35% of this bank, Mr. Thornton. I've been a silent partner for 15 years because Samuel preferred it that way and because I had no interest in the spotlight. But I'm not silent anymore." She turned to face the lobby, addressing all the people with their phones still raised. "Everything that happened here today is documented. Videos have been taken. Witnesses were present. The question now isn't whether this story gets out. The question is what kind of story it becomes." She looked back at Richard. "You can make this a story about a bank that made a mistake and tried to bury it. Or you can make it a story about a bank that made a mistake and decided to do something about it. Your choice." Richard stood very still. Behind him, Victoria had sunk down into a chair, her face buried in her hands. The security guard looked like he wanted to melt into the marble floor. Daniel had finally moved, stepping out from behind the counter, his young face set with something that looked like determination. "Mrs. Stone," Daniel said, his voice cracking. Rebecca turned to look at him. "I should have said something," he continued, words tumbling out in a rush. "When it was happening, I knew it wasn't right. I knew she shouldn't have torn up your check without verifying it. But I didn't say anything. I just stood there and I let it happen, and I'm so sorry. Rebecca studied him. Really looked at him for the first time since this whole nightmare began. He was young, couldn't be more than 25. His hands were trembling. His face was pale. But he'd stepped forward when everyone else had stepped back. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Daniel. Daniel Morris." "Daniel." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Do you know why you didn't say anything?" He shook his head, misery written across every feature. "Because you were afraid. Afraid of losing your job. Afraid of contradicting your superior. Afraid of being wrong." She took a step toward him. "Those are human fears, Daniel. Normal fears. But the next time you see something like this, and there will be a next time, I want you to remember how you feel right now. Remember this shame, this regret. And I want you to ask yourself which is worse, the fear of speaking up or the shame of staying silent." Daniel nodded, unable to speak, tears running down his face. Richard cleared his throat. "Mrs. Stone, if we proceed with an investigation, a full investigation as you've described, I'll need your cooperation. Your testimony. Your willingness to be identified publicly." "My privacy ended the moment she tore up that check," Rebecca said, glancing at Victoria. "I know what's coming. The news stories. The social media posts. The people who'll say I planned this, that I wanted attention, that I'm playing the victim. I'm ready for all of it." She walked toward the door, her worn shoes clicking softly against the marble that had been designed to intimidate people like her. At the threshold, she stopped and looked back. "I'll have my lawyers contact you tomorrow," she said to Richard. "The investigation begins immediately. And Mr. Thornton?" "Yes. The next time a woman walks into this bank wearing a uniform and holding a check that seems too large for someone like her, I want your staff to remember this day. I want them to remember that they have no idea who they're looking at. And I want them to treat her with respect anyway. Not because she might be rich. Not because she might be powerful. But because that's what human beings deserve." Richard nodded, his face grave. "I understand. Do you?" Rebecca's voice softened. "Because I don't think you do. Not really. You see, Mr. Thornton, you've never been invisible. You've never walked into a room and felt every eye on you, judging you, deciding you don't belong. You've never been followed through a store by security. Never had someone clutch their purse tighter when you sat down next to them. Never had a taxi pass you by on a rainy night because of the color of your skin." She looked around the lobby one last time. "This isn't about one bad manager or one bad day. This is about a system that teaches people to see someone like me and think threat instead of human being. And until you understand that, really understand it in your bones, nothing will change." She pushed open the door and stepped out into the afternoon sun. Inside, Richard Thornton turned to Victoria Brennan, who sat slumped in her chair, mascara running down her face, her perfect professional image destroyed. "My office," he said quietly. "Now." But even as he said it, he knew nothing would ever be the same. Not for Victoria. Not for the bank. And not for him. The lobby slowly came back to life. Customers resumed their whispered conversations. Phones were lowered. The security guard retreated to his post. Daniel returned to his station behind the counter, moving like someone in a dream. But nobody forgot what they'd witnessed. Nobody forgot the woman in the waitress uniform who'd stood her ground. Who'd picked up the pieces of her torn check with dignity. Who'd looked at powerful people and made them feel small. Outside, Rebecca stood on the sidewalk, letting the sunlight warm her face. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a text from Esther. "You okay, baby? You've been gone a while." Rebecca smiled. Sweet Esther, who'd given her a job when nobody else would. Who'd never once made her feel small or invisible. Who'd treated her like family. She texted back, "I'm okay. Be back tomorrow. And Esther? Thank you. For everything." Then she looked up at the massive building of Madison Trust Bank, with its marble columns and brass fixtures and crystal chandeliers. All that wealth. All that power. All that certainty about who belonged and who didn't. And she thought about her children. Joshua in California. Miriam in Chicago. Both of them working hard, building their lives, trying to make their way in a world that would judge them before they even opened their mouths. She thought about all the other people out there. People wearing uniforms, people working honest jobs, people just trying to survive, who walked into places like this every day and were made to feel like they didn't matter. And she knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating Victoria or hurting the bank. It was about making sure that the next person, the next waitress or janitor or bus driver, would be treated like a human being. That was worth any amount of publicity, any amount of scrutiny, any amount of discomfort. Rebecca adjusted her uniform and started walking toward the subway station. Tomorrow, she'd be back at Esther's diner, serving breakfast to customers who wouldn't know her story. But tonight, the story was just beginning. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth. The video hit the internet like a match dropped into gasoline. By the time Rebecca reached her apartment in the Bronx, it had been viewed 500,000 times. By midnight, that number had climbed to 3 million. By sunrise the next morning, the entire country was talking about the woman in the waitress uniform and the bank manager who'd torn up her $10 million check. Rebecca sat on her small couch in her tiny apartment, watching her phone light up with notifications. Calls from news stations. Messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Friend requests from strangers. The whole world suddenly wanted a piece of her. She turned off her phone and sat in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of her building. Mrs. Chin upstairs walking across her floor. The Martinez family's TV playing too loud through the thin walls. The radiator clanking its nightly song. For years ago, she'd lived in a mansion in Westchester with rooms she never used and silence, so complete it felt like living in a tomb. Now she lived in a place where she could hear her neighbors breathe, and somehow, it felt more like home than that mansion ever had. Her phone buzzed again. She'd turned it off, but it had turned itself back on, the way phones do when the world decides you need to be reachable. This time it was a call from Joshua, her son. She answered. "Mom." His voice came through tight with emotion. "Mom, I just saw the video. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call me? Baby, it's 3 a.m. in California. I don't care what time it is. Mom, that woman tore up your check. She threw it at you. In front of all those people. And you just stood there." His voice cracked. "You just stood there and took it." Rebecca closed her eyes. "I wasn't taking it, Joshua. I was making a choice. A choice to be humiliated? A choice to not be silent anymore." There was a long pause. Then she heard him take a shaky breath. "When I was 12, do you remember? We went to that country club for Dad's business thing. And the security guard stopped me at the door. Asked me if I was lost. Asked me who I belonged to, like I was a puppy that had wandered away from its owner." Rebecca's heart clenched. "I remember. And Dad got so angry. He made such a scene. He pulled out his membership card and his wallet and basically shoved his wealth in that guard's face until the guy apologized. And I remember thinking that was power. That having money meant people couldn't treat you that way. Oh, baby. But it doesn't, does it?" Joshua's voice was raw now. "That video, Mom, you had more money than everyone in that bank combined. And it didn't matter. She still looked at you and saw. She saw a black woman in a uniform," Rebecca finished gently. "And she decided that was all she needed to know." Joshua was crying now. She could hear it in his breathing. Her strong, brilliant son, who was studying engineering at Stanford, who never let anyone see him break, was crying 3,000 miles away. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm sorry Dad left you with nothing. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I didn't." "Joshua." Rebecca's voice was firm but loving. "Listen to me. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. Do you understand? But I should have. You were grieving your father and trying to finish college. You were 19 years old. You don't get to carry guilt for things that weren't your fault." She heard him blow his nose. "What happens now?" "Now?" Rebecca looked around her small apartment. "Now I go back to work tomorrow. I serve breakfast at Esther's. And I wait. Wait for what? For them to show me who they really are." After she hung up with Joshua, she called Miriam. Her daughter answered on the first ring, voice alert despite the early hour in Chicago. "I saw it," Miriam said immediately. "The whole hospital is talking about it. Mom, someone recognized you. One of the other residents. Her mother used to work for Dad's company. She told everyone who you were." "And what did people say?" Miriam hesitated. "Some people think you're a hero. Some people think you set the whole thing up for attention. And some people..." She stopped. "Some people think I deserved it," Rebecca finished. "I got into an argument with one of the attending physicians," Miriam said, her voice tight with anger. "He said you were playing the victim. That you walked in there dressed like that on purpose, trying to make that manager look bad. He said if you were really rich, you would have dressed appropriately." Rebecca felt something cold settle in her chest. And what did you say? I told him that my mother shouldn't have to prove her worth with designer clothes. That the fact that he thought she should tells me everything I need to know about him. Miriam's voice shook. Then I reported him to HR for creating a hostile work environment. Miriam. No, Mom. No. I'm tired of being quiet. I'm tired of playing nice. I'm tired of making myself smaller so other people feel comfortable. You taught me that this morning. You stood in that bank and refused to be small, and I'm not going to be small anymore either. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of you too, Mom. What you did, standing there, picking up those pieces of paper with everyone watching, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. After the call ended, Rebecca sat in the darkness of her apartment and let herself cry. Not from sadness. Not from anger. But from something deeper. The release of 4 years of holding everything inside. For years of smiling at people who treated her like she was invisible. For years of swallowing every small humiliation and telling herself it didn't matter. It mattered. It had always mattered. The next morning, Rebecca put on her uniform and went to work. The subway ride was different this time. People stared at her. Some whispered to their companions. A young black woman approached her at the 125th Street stop. You're her, the woman said. From the video. Rebecca nodded. Thank you. The woman's eyes were bright with tears. My grandmother worked as a maid for 40 years. She used to tell me stories about how people treated her. Like she was furniture. Like she didn't matter. And yesterday, watching you stand up to that woman, I called my grandmother and we watched it together. And she cried. She said, finally. Finally someone said it out loud. The woman squeezed Rebecca's hand and got off at the next stop. When Rebecca arrived at Esther's diner, there was a crowd outside. News vans. Reporters with cameras and microphones. They surged forward when they saw her. Mrs. Stone, can you tell us what happened? Are you suing the bank? How does it feel to be a viral sensation? Did you plan this as a publicity stunt? Rebecca pushed through them without speaking. The door to the diner opened, and Esther stood there like a guardian angel, all 6 feet and 200 pounds of protective fury. Back up, Esther boomed. This is private property. You want to eat, come in and order. You want to harass my employee, get gone. She pulled Rebecca inside and locked the door behind them. The diner was full of regular customers, but they all stopped and looked up when Rebecca entered. The construction crew in the corner. The teacher in booth 3. The lawyer who never tipped more than $1. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the construction crew started clapping. One by one, the other customers joined in. The teacher. The lawyer. Even Tommy behind the counter, who'd worked there longer than Rebecca and usually never showed emotion about anything. Rebecca stood there, overwhelmed, as the applause washed over her. Esther squeezed her shoulder. You did good, baby. Real good. I just did what needed to be done. That's what makes it good. The day passed in a blur. Customers who'd never looked at Rebecca twice suddenly wanted to talk to her. To shake her hand. To tell her their own stories of being dismissed, overlooked, treated as less than. The teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, told her about being followed through a department store while shopping for her daughter's birthday present. The security guard watched me the whole time. Like I was going to steal something. When I paid with my credit card, he looked surprised. Actually surprised that I had money. The construction crew told her about being refused service at a restaurant in Midtown. They said they were full, but we could see empty tables through the window. Were brown men in work boots. That's all they needed to see. Even the lawyer, Mr. Patterson, who'd never left more than $1, approached her at the end of his meal. He placed a $50 bill on the table. I owe you about 4 years of proper tips, he said quietly. And an apology. I never saw you. Not really. I saw a waitress. A uniform. But I didn't see you. I'm sorry for that. Rebecca picked up the 50 and held it out to him. Keep your money, Mr. Patterson. But maybe next time, just look at people. Really look at them. See them as human beings. That's worth more than any tip. He took the money back, nodded, and left. 3 days later, Rebecca received a call from Richard Thornton. Mrs. Stone, I wanted to update you on the situation. Victoria Brennan has been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. We've also begun a comprehensive review of our policies and procedures across all branches. That's a start, Rebecca said. I want you to know, I take full responsibility for the culture that allowed this to happen. I've been chairman of this bank for 8 years, and I should have seen it. Should have addressed it. Should have, yes. But you didn't. The question is what you're going to do now. I'd like to meet with you. Discuss the investigation. Hear your recommendations for changes we need to make. My recommendations? Rebecca almost laughed. Mr. Thornton, I shouldn't have to tell you how to treat people with basic dignity. You're right. You shouldn't. But the fact is, I need help. We need help. The bank, the industry, all of us. We've been operating under assumptions we never questioned, making judgments we never examined. And it took you standing in that lobby, holding pieces of a torn check, to make us see it. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. All right, I'll meet with you. But I want the meeting to be public. Recorded. Transparent. No more backroom deals. No more quiet settlements. If we're going to change things, we're going to do it in the light. Agreed. The public hearing took place 2 weeks later in a conference room that had been set up to accommodate media coverage. Rebecca sat at a table, wearing a simple navy dress. The first time in 4 years she'd dressed like the woman she used to be. Across from her sat Richard Thornton, several board members, and a team of lawyers. Victoria Brennan was there too, at a separate table, looking like a ghost of the woman who'd stood in that bank lobby. Her eyes were hollow. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup. No designer suit. Just a woman who'd lost everything. The hearing began with Richard presenting the findings of the investigation. The numbers were damning. Over the past 5 years, customers of color at our Madison Avenue branch were subjected to additional verification procedures, 4 times more often than white customers with identical financial profiles. Transaction delays for Black and Latino customers averaged 18 minutes longer than for white customers. And in 73 documented cases, legitimate checks were flagged as suspicious based solely on the appearance of the customer presenting them. The room erupted in murmurs. Camera flashes went off. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Richard continued, his voice heavy. This pattern wasn't limited to one branch. We found similar disparities across 22 of our 40 branches nationwide. This isn't about one manager making one mistake. This is systemic. This is institutional. And this is unacceptable. Then it was Victoria's turn to speak. She stood slowly, gripping the edge of the table for support. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want to apologize to Mrs. Stone. I want to apologize to everyone I've hurt with my actions. But I know that apologies aren't enough. She looked directly at Rebecca for the first time. I spent my entire career believing I could judge people accurately at a glance. I was proud of this ability. I thought it made me good at my job. But I was wrong. I looked at you and saw a waitress who didn't belong in my bank. I never considered that my bank didn't deserve you. Her voice broke, but she pushed through. I'm resigning from Madison Trust, effective immediately. Not because I was caught, but because I no longer trust my own judgment. That's not something I can fix with training. That's a failure I have to live with every single day for the rest of my life. She sat down heavily, and the room fell silent. Then the chairman of the committee, a silver-haired congressman from Ohio, turned to Rebecca. Mrs. Stone, you've heard the bank's findings. You've heard Mrs. Brennan's apology. What would you like to say? Rebecca stood slowly. She looked out at the room, at the reporters, the cameras, the people who'd come to witness this moment. And she thought about all the people who weren't there. All the waitresses and janitors and bus drivers who'd experienced the same thing she had, but didn't have the resources to fight back. People have asked me why I did this, she began. Why I didn't just accept a private settlement and move on. Why I subjected myself to scrutiny and exposure when I'd spent 4 years trying to be invisible. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The answer is simple. I did it because I could. Because I had the resources, the evidence, and the platform to make sure the story was heard. Most people who experience what I experienced don't have those things. They get humiliated, and then they go home, and nothing changes. She looked directly at Victoria. Mrs. Brennan, I don't hate you. I don't even blame you entirely. You were operating within a system that taught you to look at people like me and see a threat. That system failed both of us. The difference is that I had the power to fight back, and you didn't have the power to see me clearly. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. But here's what I want people to understand, Rebecca continued, addressing the room now. This isn't about one bad manager or one bad day. This is about a system that teaches people to make snap judgments based on appearance. A system that says certain people belong in certain spaces and others don't. A system that values wealth over humanity. She took a breath. My husband, before he died, asked me if I knew how the world would treat me without the money, without the name, without the things that make people respect you. And I told him it wouldn't matter. I told him people were fundamentally good. Her voice grew stronger. I was wrong, but not in the way I thought. People aren't fundamentally good or fundamentally bad. They're fundamentally human. And humans are shaped by the systems they live in. If the system teaches you that certain people are suspicious, you'll be suspicious. If the system teaches you that certain people don't belong, you'll treat them like they don't belong. She looked at Richard Thornton. So when you ask me what should change, here's my answer. Everything. The training. The policies. The culture. The assumptions. All of it needs to be examined and rebuilt from the ground up. Because as long as someone can walk into a bank in a uniform and be treated as less than human, the system is broken. The room erupted in applause. But Rebecca wasn't finished. And I want to say something to everyone watching this. To all the people working service jobs, wearing uniforms, doing honest work, you matter. Your dignity matters. You don't need $1 million in the bank to deserve respect. You don't need designer clothes or a fancy car. You deserve to be treated with basic human decency simply because you're human. She sat down, and the applause grew louder. 6 months later, Rebecca walked into a small community bank in Brooklyn, 3 blocks from her apartment. She was wearing her Esther's Diner uniform, having just finished the lunch shift. She approached the counter and placed a check in front of the teller. A young black woman with natural hair and a warm smile. "I'd like to deposit this, please," Rebecca said. The teller picked up the check. It was for $500, tip money Rebecca had saved over the past few months from her job at the diner. She'd kept working there, even after everything. Not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. Because Esther had given her a job when no one else would. And that meant something. "Of course, ma'am," the teller said. She processed the transaction with quick, efficient movements, then looked up with a genuine smile. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Rebecca looked at her. At this young woman who had asked no questions about her appearance, demanded no explanation for her uniform, made no assumptions about who she was or what she deserved. "No," Rebecca said softly. "That's everything. Thank you." She walked out of the bank and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the autumn sunshine on her face. The street was busy with the ordinary rhythms of Brooklyn life. Mothers pushing strollers. Teenagers laughing on a corner. An old man walking his dog. No one looked at her twice. No one knew her name. She was just another woman in a uniform, going about her day. And for the first time in a long time, that felt exactly right. Her phone buzzed. A text from Joshua. "Just saw the news. Madison Trust is implementing new policies based on your recommendations. Mom, you're changing things." Another text, this time from Miriam. "They're teaching a case study about you in my healthcare administration class. About bias in service delivery. I'm so proud I could burst." And one from Esther. "Girl, you coming in tomorrow? Because I need my best waitress for the Sunday brunch crowd." Rebecca smiled and texted back to all 3. "I love you. And yes, I'll be there." She thought about Samuel, her husband, who'd asked her all those years ago if she knew how the world would treat her without the money and the name. She'd spent 4 years finding out. The answer had been painful, sometimes brutal, often heartbreaking. But standing on that Brooklyn sidewalk, watching the ordinary world go by, Rebecca realized something else. The world wasn't fixed. It wasn't immutable. It could be pushed, challenged, changed. She had proven that. Not by being rich. Not by being powerful. But by being willing to stand in a marble lobby and refuse to leave. By being willing to pick up the pieces of a torn check with dignity. By being willing to say out loud what so many people experienced in silence. Respect, she understood now, should never be something you had to earn by revealing your bank balance. It should be the default. The starting point. The minimum standard of human interaction. She had spent 4 years learning that lesson the hard way. Now maybe a few more people had learned it too. Rebecca adjusted her uniform, smoothed down her apron, and started walking home. Tomorrow, she would be back at Esther's Diner, serving breakfast to strangers. Some would know her story. Most wouldn't. And that was okay. Because this was never about her story alone. It was about every person who'd ever been made to feel invisible. Every person who'd been judged by their clothes or their skin or their job title instead of their humanity. Every person who'd stood in a space where they didn't belong and been made to feel small. This was for all of them. And as Rebecca walked through the Brooklyn streets in her faded uniform, she carried with her something more valuable than $10 million. She carried the knowledge that one person, standing up, speaking out, refusing to be silent, one person could start a change that rippled outward in ways no one could predict. The torn check had been taped back together and framed. It hung now in the lobby of Madison Trust's headquarters, along with a plaque that read, "A reminder that dignity cannot be bought and respect should never have to be earned. It should be freely given to every human being who walks through our doors." And every employee who worked for Madison Trust, from the newest teller to the chairman himself, walked past that frame every single day. Some days they really looked at it. Some days they really understood. And slowly, painfully, imperfectly, things began to change. Not because of one dramatic moment in a bank lobby, but because one woman in a waitress uniform had stood her ground and said, "I'm not leaving." And the world had finally listened. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it moved you, made you think, or stayed with you even for a moment, that means everything. We pour our hearts into every story we share, and knowing you're here makes it all worthwhile. Please subscribe to this channel to support our growth. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. Until next time, remember, you never know who you're looking at. Treat everyone with the dignity they deserve.